let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We have a
This is so
we
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
It's actually
in
a big
employee
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
As the
developer-
Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Administrator Office Hours live stream here on Red Hat Live Streaming. I am Andrew Sullivan, your host, and I am joined as always by Johnny Rickard. Hello, Johnny. How are you today?
I'm good to go, man. How are you?
Do you know how special today is?
I do.
Yeah. There's three reasons today is a special day, and I'm not even counting Marco and Eric joining us. Like there's three separate reasons. So one, it's May the 4th. Right. So happy Star Wars Day to any Star Wars fans that are out there, or a lamentatious. I don't know. I'm making up words now. Star Wars Day for any Star Trek fans, I guess. So two, this is the 2-year anniversary of OpenShift TV.
Dang.
Yeah. So 2 years ago was when we had the very first stream, back when, it was, I'd say mostly the same crew, but that's not really true. We've added quite a few streams. We've done a whole bunch of other stuff on here. Stephanie, of course, and you, right? All new.
Yeah.
Not that this show is the first one to stream, but yeah, 2 years ago was when we had our first stream here on OpenShift, or it's now Red Hat Live Streaming, but at the time it was OpenShift TV.
Nice. Awesome.
So, and then third, and certainly not least of all, this is also, from what I remember, I should probably double check this. This is the week that Kubernetes was released. I believe that this is Kubernetes' 7th anniversary. So seventh birthday. I think it was 2015 was when Kubernetes 1.0 was released.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a busy week.
Yeah, that's awesome. We also had the big release yesterday of the latest version of Kubernetes, so it's right on time.
Yeah, I know you've got that in our top of mind topics to talk about. So yeah, it's crazy, right? 24 releases in 7 years, and just all of the I'm constantly flabbergasted that we have, and by we I don't mean we, you and I don't mean we Red Hat. I mean like we as an industry have been able to adapt and adopt to this, model of, at one point, Kubernetes was quarterly releases, where there's a non-inconsequential number of folks who are keeping up with and pushing that release schedule. And, I've said, I don't know how many times, right? I'm an old storage admin, right? Storage admins, like maybe every 2 years we'll do an update, and because you got to schedule downtime for like everything. Like the whole data center you have to have downtime for. So, it's having this platform that's hosting all of these applications, and it's in many cases the core of, the business, is being hosted on platforms like OpenShift. And, we push out Z streams every week, every 2 weeks, and folks are adopting, all of that other stuff. I won't say everybody, which is part of the reason why Marco and Eric have joined us today, because hello. And so not everybody is moving that fast, right? And I think you two are very familiar and very knowledgeable around, folks who they're not laggards, because I think there's very good reasons that some folks are still on OpenShift 3. But it's very important that we start considering and start, executing on those upgrades and those migrations today. So, and arguably a year ago, right? So that is one of the reasons why.
I mean, we did, right? Like we've been doing this for 2 years already. We have migrated like thousands and thousands of applications. So yeah, but obviously, like some move fast, some move slower for all kinds of different reasons. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah. So today's topic, if you haven't seen any of our social media or any of those other stuff that has gone out, is around the migration toolkits. And in particular, what I wanted to focus on is the migration toolkit for containers. So we'll talk a little bit more about the other migration toolkits once we get a little further in. But yeah, how do we move those applications, whether it's OpenShift 3 to OpenShift 4, whether it's within OpenShift versions? I think I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I think we can even migrate from just vanilla Kubernetes into OpenShift as well. I'm not getting
that's a new use case for us that we're trying to solve with the brand new tool that we're working on. Yeah, like
got it.
But it's actually functional, but it's not something that we have like a full G release yet. Like it's a tech preview product that we're working on right now.
Very cool. So yeah, constantly growing, constantly expanding, and ultimately helping customers stay ahead. It's always amazing to me that OpenShift 3.11, which is based on Kubernetes 1.11, which is now 13 full versions old. If you think back to all of those releases, all of those things, we're talking at least 3 years. I think it's more like 4 years. If I'm counting correctly, because 13 versions, probably 3.5 years. 3.5 years since that release, and it's still supported by Red Hat for now. So, which is part of the reason why we're talking. All right, I'll quit rambling. Let's move on to our. Actually, I almost completely skipped over because I've already been chatting with you, Marco and Eric. So, Marco, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, my name is Marco Bijube. I'm based in Canada. I'm a product manager working on migration toolkits at Red Hat. I've been doing that for probably almost 5 years now, but I've been at Red Hat for 10, and before that, I've been on the sales side in Canada. So I was in my first couple of years at Red Hat. I've been helping our customers in Canada migrate to cloud, and now I'm pleased to work with our super sharp engineering team to actually build migration tools to help customers stay on the latest and greatest of our cloud platform at Red Hat.
Yeah, so super important with all the things that we've got going on. We'll be talking about the etcd inconsistency issue, for example, again. So staying on the current versions is always important. And then Eric, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Hey, sure. Thanks for having me on. My name is Eric Nelson. I'm an engineering manager today. I joined Red Hat in 2015. So around the time Cube, I guess, had its first version. I've been kind of tangentially working with OpenShift since then. I started life at Red Hat as an engineer, and I kind of continued up through the independent or individual contributor route. And now I'm working as a manager in engineering, so I still get to play with a lot of fun and interesting stuff. And I work with Marco solving customer problems around OpenShift 3 to 4. So and that mission has kind of expanded quite a bit to include application portability and workload portability, migration of state, just a lot of kind of interesting problems in that space. So when you talk about shutting down data centers in order to do storage migrations, it definitely we've seen what that looks like, and we're trying to make that less painful. And that's basically all I've been thinking about for the past 3 years. So thank you.
Yeah, it's some folks know Johnny and I in a previous lives, I should say, because apparently I'm the new guy here on the show. I've only been at Red Hat for 3.5 years. But a long time ago, we actually worked together. We were peers as administrators, and I know Johnny and I had many late nights together, planning outages and shutting things down and coordinating all of that. So it's
guarding cats.
Yeah, yeah, working with the application teams who what do you mean you have to I don't use that storage? Well, it's on the virtualization platform, so yeah, you do.
Indeed.
Anyways. Let's get to this week's top of mind topics. So I see some comments here in chat. Mike Murphy, yes, May the 4th be with you as well. Happy Star Wars Day. Any documents for OpenShift 4.10 and disconnected? So yes, you can deploy in the documentation. Johnny, are you looking that up?
I am looking it up right now.
Okay. So there's a specific page for disconnected OpenShift. Basically, once you mirror the images across, you use the image content source policy. You apply that in your install config, and then it doesn't matter if you're doing UPI, IPI, bare metal rates. It just works all disconnected. And that ICSP, the image content source policy, is what redirects all of those image polls to your offline mirror. And we also have a stream. We did a disconnected deep dive stream, so we'll dig that link up as well. share free resources. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here because I'll also need it for our top of mind. So I always recommend to folks that kind of 3 places. So one, you can go to learn.openshift.com. This will redirect you over to developers.redhat now. And inside of here, you have just a huge number of resources available to you. For example, this OpenShift 4.9 playground, right? There's a bunch of other stuff in here. You can see there's 10 pages of these samples inside of here. And they're not all developer related. They imported all of the ones that were available before. So there's a bunch of stuff available from there, all completely free. And it's literally like, you click the start here and it might have to provision an environment in the background, in which case, if it does, it's like a 15-minute wait. But otherwise, you can see I can click the launch here and jump right in. The second one that I always suggest to people is try.openshift.com. So this one you'll see also redirects over to cloud.redhat.com. Oh no, we broke it. Try.open. Oh, yeah. So our web properties are undergoing a bit of a migration right now. So note to self: harass the marketing team about why our try page is now broken.
And by the way, that's one of the new use case we're working on from a migration point of view. Is if you start there and you are building your first application on OpenShift there, then in the future we'll have a tool to help you migrate your application to maybe eventually your fully enterprise supported that OpenShift cluster, right? So that's something we've been asked by some people that, when I start an application on try.openshift.com, how do I eventually move on to my enterprise supported cluster, right? So that's one of the use cases we were looking at right now.
Very cool. So normally when this page actually works, it has links to a bunch of resources, including how to register for a developer account. And with a Red Hat developer account, you are entitled to, I think it's 16 cores of OpenShift that you can use for single user non-production. So you can deploy OpenShift, you can do all the things with it, you can learn it, whether you're an administrator or a developer. And last but not least, I always suggest to people that they look up the DO080 training course. So this one, which we can see is here on Red Hat Learning, it is a free course. You can go, you can take this. It kind of introduces you and gives you some basics around Kubernetes and OpenShift. It's a great start down that path. I know it says based on 4.1. I'm positive that is not true now. I'm sure it's something much newer than that, but it's a good place to get started. And again, it's completely free. So I always suggest those to folks. Most of the audience on YouTube, no, actually, it's so for anybody who doesn't know, on the back end, we actually stream to 3 different places, sometimes 4. So we normally stream to Twitch, and then we stream to the OpenShift YouTube channel and the Red Hat YouTube channel. And then we also stream to Red Hat TV. I think that program was temporarily paused. Stephanie will probably send me a message in a moment. But yeah, I always tend to tell folks to check out YouTube, because YouTube actually keeps a history of, right, they don't delete the streams after they're gone. So Twitch, they're only there for, I think, 30 days. And you can't leave comments and all that other stuff. So I always suggest folks use YouTube. So top of mind topics. I'm going to stop getting distracted, I promise. So 2 things real quick, 2.5 things real quick. So one, next week is Red Hat Summit. I believe that it is a no-cost virtual event. There will be some in-person folks, but I think the majority of us, myself included, will be virtual. So you can go to redhat.com/summit. I'll just show that because I happen to have my browser shown. So you see you can sign in here. Tons of information that'll be coming out there. Definitely check it out if you have the chance. I think that we are going to be having a blog post be put up. I don't know. I'll have to confirm around anything OpenShift related that will be at Red Hat Summit. So keep an eye on the OpenShift blog, which is cloud.redhat.com/blog. So see the hybrid cloud blog here, and this is where we have all that information out. So the second one, which is semi-related here, if we scroll down a little bit, we have this blog post right here. we have a blog post that has all of the stuff that is happening at KubeCon EU, so happening over in Valencia, Spain, the week after next. So there is, and I was taken by surprise, to be honest. There is a stunning amount of Red Hat related things and projects and all the other stuff that is happening at KubeCon. So if anybody is, whether you'll be there in person, will you be there virtually, there's a ton of information that'll be coming out there. In addition to which, there is the OpenShift Commons that will be happening, as well as I think there's a GitOps event. I think there's several other events that are happening. Let's see if they're on this page. Yeah, here's the Commons gathering agenda. So definitely, I always encourage folks to check out what we've got going on at KubeCon. And the Commons gathering itself, I don't know if you can register separately for it or not. Yeah, you can register to attend virtually. So it looks like it might be no cost to attend that. I don't know, but these are always great. Diane and the Commons team does a phenomenal job of putting those shows on. So I'll close out those two things by saying that as a result of Summit next week, KubeCon the week after, we will not be streaming the next 2 weeks. So we will return on May the 25th. So the next 2 weeks, please direct your attention and your views over to all the stuff that we've got going on there. So I'm looking forward to seeing Summit again. I think Andrew's personal opinion is I think that this first event will have a lot of great information, but the deeply technical information will be in the second phase of Summit events. So register for this Summit, attend all the stuff that's really cool, and you'll automatically be registered for and get all the emails and all the other stuff about the follow-on events, where we'll have a lot of that technical information. Let's see, Johnny. Johnny, you had a couple of things in here.
Yep. So I'm sorry, let me just get over to the link really quick. Okay. So yeah, the big one is that 1.24 of Kubernetes released yesterday. It was the first release of 22. It's called Stargazer. They had, rightfully so, it fits with everything going on right now. But there were 14 enhancements that went to stable. I think there's 15 that are going to the next, they're going to dev or something like that. And then there's a couple that have been deprecated. But the big ones that I think that were coming out about that were coming out of the stable, or a lot of the things that Andrew's been talking about before, with the entry storage providers moving over to the CSI. So if you look at the release notes, there's stuff like on Azure. I think there's a couple other ones that are going from entry. They're migrating from entry to CSI. And then another cool feature that's coming out is storage capacity tracking, which, if you think about it, it's essentially where you have a pod that's going to be scheduled on a node that has a PV requirement. Well, right now, the way it works is it'll go to that node and then try and schedule the PV or build out the PV. And if there's no storage available, or if it's at capacity, then it'll just kind of die. Where now it's going to go out and it's going to do a check to make sure that storage is available before it tries to actually provision the PV. So it's a pretty cool feature. And then there's some API deprecations that are coming out. Not this release, but really the next release. And the big one's going to be the batch API. So we'll see that in OpenShift 4.11. 4.12 timeframe. So that'll be Kubernetes, most likely like 125, I think, something like that, or 126, or maybe even 124. And the last thing out of this one is the beta APIs are all turned off by default. So basically, like if you need to turn them on, you'll have to manually turn them on. And I know I said the last one, but really the last one is the Docker shim was actually removed from the kubelet on this release as well.
And while you've been talking here, so we actually Rob Zumsky did a blog post planning for and reviewing. I don't know if my screen is still shared. So there's a blog post that Rob did about API deprecations and finding those and all that other stuff. So he walks through it again. We also did a stream on this, so you can find all of those APIs, deprecated APIs that are being used. And this
MTC will actually help you find those differences too if you're migrating workloads from, say, 3.11 to a modern 4 cluster. And that's going to become more likely as 4 continues to progress. So that's something we've been paying attention to ourselves.
Oh, that's awesome, because I think it was 4.8 to 4.9 was the first major deprecation. And so now it's one of those like, or removal, I should say, not deprecation. So now if you're going into something later than 4.9 or in the future later than 4.12, you might not even, you might not have in a cluster to spin it up in to get those API warnings through the CLI or through the GUI to be able to fix them. So that's great news. And hello, Tiger. I see your hello. Thank you, Stephanie, for highlighting it because I missed it in the live chat. Yeah, so definitely keep an eye on this. One thing I like to point out to folks, and I think I did this on Twitter, is if you're looking in your cluster and you see those, let me see if Rob included an example in here. Yeah, so if you do this get API request count and you see, you'll see maybe it's an API that is removed is being used, and then you can dig in and you can see what precisely is using it. Generally speaking, if it's something at the system or if it's an OpenShift service, Red Hat will take care of those, right? The ones that you really want to care about are the ones that are from your applications, right? Any locally or partner developed operators, although we do try very, very hard to work with our partners to make sure that they're aware of those and they're addressing all of that stuff before it becomes a critical issue. But yeah, generally speaking, Red Hat will take care of all the Kubernetes. Kubernetes takes care of the Kubernetes ones. Red Hat will take care of all the OpenShift ones, including all of the Red Hat operators. So it's really the stuff that your teams, your application folks are creating to be aware of. All right, I think I had one more in here. Because we talked about API deprecations. Oh, I wanted to very quickly talk about the etcd inconsistency issue. So we've been talking about this for a few weeks. Remember, this was the reason that updates between OpenShift 4.8 and 4.9 were temporarily disabled. So the issue is in etcd version 3.5.0 through 3.5.3, there was the potential for some an inconsistency to happen. Basically, in very specific scenarios where etcd was shut down uncleanly, like it was terminated due to an out-of-memory condition or the node failing, something like that, it wouldn't have committed all of the data to disk due to basically a bug. So with 4.9.28 and 4.10.9, we reopened the upgrade paths from 4.8 to 4.9. And we have been encouraging everybody to upgrade to at least those versions. So if you're on 4.9, please get to at least 4.9.28. If you're on 4.10, please get to at least 4.10.9. But I want to point out that the bug isn't fixed in those two releases. We've simply implemented a mitigation to help detect it and prevent that corruption or that issue from happening. And what could happen is essentially, if that scenario occurs, it will kick the etcd node out of the cluster. So you'll end up with a control plane node that is in a not ready status, that is in a, etcd is not fully consistent. So if that happens, basically you just have to do a recovery of that etcd node to bring it back into the cluster. So rather than having that, silent corruption issue, probably not silent, but rather than having that risk of it introducing a corruption into the cluster, it just prevents it from happening right at the go. You just do that recovery and get there. So not fixed, but definitely much safer once you get to one of those two versions or later. And they are working on the eventual mitigation, or the eventual fix. I don't know precisely what version of OpenShift that will be in, however. All right. So I see, Stephanie, thank you for including links around the Migration Toolkit learning path. Yep. Training on, I'm just reviewing chat real quick to make sure that there's nothing here before we move on to today's topic. So as we said at the beginning, this is something that is really, really important as we approach the end, the last final, the end of the end when it comes to OpenShift 3 and specifically OpenShift 3.11. Because, for better or for worse, it was not an in-place upgrade, right? It's a deploy a new cluster and migrate your applications. But I think application migration extends and is applicable well beyond just an OpenShift 3 to OpenShift more migration, right? Marco and Eric, you know this far better than I ever could, right? Whether it's, hey, with stereotypical examples, right? Hey, we acquired this cluster, right? This other team was doing it, and now it's come under our management, and we want to consolidate. Whether it's, hey, we need to
we're seeing
distribute.
We're seeing a lot of interest of migrating to Arrow and Rosa these days. So there's a lot of questions about migrating from on-premise to the cloud, or migrating from on-premise to a managed service in the cloud. So yeah, that comes up a lot. So that's another reason. And it's not like it's one tool fits all either, right? Like when we're talking about migrations to customer, like there's a wide spectrum of use cases and need even for a migration tool in the first place. Some customers can reprovision everything from pipeline. They don't have state, like they don't need the tool. They don't need a migration tool at all. And some others will have no automation at all. And you have all the other scenarios in between, right? So, but the most common scenario is I have a percentage of my applications that is stateless and can be reprovisioned from pipeline. I have a percentage of my applications that can be reprovisioned from pipeline, but as state. So I need to migrate the PVs, right? Even if I can reprovision from pipeline, the data is important to me and that needs to be migrated. And I have another percentage of my applications that have no automation at all because it's not as critical for me, but still important enough that I want to move it to my new cluster. So, and MTC can deal with all those things independently, depending on your use cases, but it's not a one scenario fits all. It's about planning a migration that makes sense for you and your applications and the kind of automation you already have.
Yeah, and I mean, I can think of dozens of scenarios ranging from we had one or two or a small number of very large clusters. Now we're moving to a model of many smaller clusters, or the inverse. There's all kinds of scenarios that come to mind. So yeah, Migration Toolkit for containers. So the upstream project here is Conveyor.
So Conveyor is let's talk about Conveyor for a couple of minutes. So Conveyor is actually an agglomeration of, it's multiple migration, not just migration tools, but like what we're trying to have in the Conveyor community is migration and modernization tools. So there's other projects, right? And they're all upstream, and as pretty much everything we do at Red Hat, we work upstream first. So this is where we build our Migration Toolkit for container. Upstream, the name of it is Crane. So if you hear that, it's actually the upstream version of MTC and our future migration tool that we can talk about later. But there's also other tools like Tackle that will help you do a full analysis of your current applications. Like it's more about migrating traditional legacy applications to a containerized based system, so to Kubernetes. So if you have like legacy apps that you want to containerize, then Tackle can help you assess all that and then help you migrate those applications to containers. We also have Forklift, which is MTV downstream. So Forklift upstream is the tool that can help you migrate virtual machines from traditional hypervisors like VMware or Rev to OpenShift virtualization. So all those projects help you, like it's the 6R approach, right? Like you probably heard in the past, replatform, refactor, I always forget one or two, but anyway, it's all about like looking at the overall applications and using the right tool to help you modernize your apps to a Kubernetes platform like OpenShift, right? And that's what we do upstream in Conveyor. And that's why we have all those projects. And we even have Pylorus now, that is a tool about once you have modernized to measure your success. So Pylorus will help you measure, having metrics, right? The DORA system metric base that helps you understand, like, are you actually modernizing the way you actually produce code and push code all the way to production. So yeah, so it's all about modernization in the first place.
It's interesting. I wonder, at least for me, I initially thought that Migration Toolkit for containers was essentially a wrapper around Valero. And I don't know whether or not Valero is used, but I know that but it's more than that too, right?
It is, yeah. You can think of it as kind of a, I mean, I can get deeper into the architecture if that's interesting, but MTC relies heavily on Valero. And basically what it's doing is, of course, Valero is like your kube native backup and recovery, disaster recovery type solution. And Cube, a lot of people use it. It's got a lot of usage in the wild outside of us. And so it did a lot of things that we knew that we needed to do when we were first designing MTC. MTC backup and recovery and DR is different than migrations, and that boils down to kind of the experience around that. MTC is supposed to be out of the box a migration tool for mass migration. So typically you'll see it under cluster admin usage, trying to we're under the scenario of mass migration, like cluster evacuations. So the initial mandate was to provide a solution at the workload layer, so it doesn't handle the control plane, to help people get off of 3 and into OpenShift 4. It quickly became apparent that it was useful even outside of just that use case for migrating workloads around from cluster to cluster. So it'll do 4 to 4. But really, the way that it works is by orchestrating backups and recoveries across 2 different clusters that both have Valero that share some intermediate repository in order to share those objects. As MTC has evolved, I've been on OpenShift TV a couple times now over the years. It's kind of been interesting to see the evolution of our product and what we've been talking about over time. Even some of you may be familiar with the project when it was called CAM, which was like a container. I don't even know what it stood for, to be honest, but I'm forgetting. Yeah, I went back and I kind of watched a little bit of that, and it was interesting to see what we were talking about at the time. At the time, we were using, like, it really only supported indirect state migrations using Valero and Rsync, which is what Valero uses under the covers for its PVC data. Since then, we've developed direct solutions ourselves that use Rsync, so you can Rsync data between PVCs directly between 2 different clusters. So we have indirect and direct, and then there's kind of 3 buckets when you think about a migration. There's your Kubernetes resources, which are relatively easy compared to state. So you're talking about basically serializing and deserializing your kube objects into and out of intermediary storage, object storage. You've got your state, of course. So if you have a stateful application, your data that lives inside of the PVCs. And it's also possible to include things like config maps or secrets that under that umbrella as application state. Maybe your application is speaking directly with the Kube API and storing state there. And then third, you've got your images. So we'll also handle images. And so the product's definitely evolved over time. And the reason I mention this as we're talking about Valero is that we've gradually added different solutions to the product that are not necessarily using Valero, but fundamentally MTC uses Valero under the covers to perform its migrations through an orchestration of backups and recoveries.
One thing I would add to what you just said, Eric, is, like, if you think about it, right, like Valero, the use case was to do backup and restore. In our case, we learned the hard way at the beginning. When you have customers are trying to migrate hundreds or thousands of applications over a weekend, if you have to back up everything, including the PVs, and then restore everything, you're copying the data twice. So that slows you down, like, significantly, right? So that's why the team has been working on ways to do the migration directly on the PV side, so that we don't have to do a full backup and a full restore to support those that has a time limit to their migrations and need this to happen as fast as possible, right?
So maybe, I don't know if this is an appropriate question or not, but is there like a relationship or some kind of interaction between what you're doing with Valero in the Migration Toolkit and what the OADP, the OpenShift API for data protection folks are doing?
100%. So we work really closely with them. I've worked with Dylan and his team since before MTC was a thing and CAM was a thing. OADP, in a lot of ways, you can think of it as like productized Valero. It does more than that, right? So, and a lot of that boils down to Valero plugins that handle OpenShift specific logic. And a lot of that stuff actually started as part of MTC. So for a while, there was no real supported manner for running Valero. So we saw, obviously, a need for backup and recovery in DR. And so OADP provides that in addition to providing APIs for third parties to develop against. And the newest version of MTC, and this has changed since the last time I was on here, actually uses, so we've basically spun off that layer, and now that's what OADP is. And so we actually just talk to OADP. That's been really nice because we get, it's under active development over there. And so we kind of are getting those fixes for free. There is a little bit of a caveat to that in that I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this, but it relates to deprecated APIs. Valero has moved on to V1 CRDs, whereas we still have to care about clusters that didn't have support for V1 CRDs. So we still have this idea of a legacy agent that runs a Valero that uses the V1 Beta 1 APIs. So OADP is not in use on your legacy platforms that don't support it. That is it comes up often, and it has become more of a thorn in our side as, like I said, 4 continues to move forwards. Yeah, so I thought I would just mention that. But yeah, on modern platforms where OADP is supported, MTC just talks to the OADP APIs in order to drive migrations.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Especially what you said, you get updates, you get development for free. Why not take advantage of that instead of doing it twice?
And sorry, yeah, I was about to jump on that comment, right, about Kasten, and I'm less familiar with PX backup. I don't know this one, but we have a great relationship, right, even with the Kasten team, right, and they are in the business of doing backup and restore. I think they have one of the issue we used to have in the past when it comes to my is like I was talking to their team recently.
You're breaking up a little bit, Marco.
Migration, it's actually a full backup and a full restore. So
I think you're coming back.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
If I keep breaking up. But yeah, each solution has pros and cons, right? And MTC is a free tool available in OpenShift, and as an operator, like there's no additional charge to it. And it has pros and cons compared to Kasten. So it's not like one tool or the other. It's like there's pros and cons in each of those tools, and it's good to understand what they're good at and what they're less good at to pick the right tool for the right job, right? But definitely, like if you have a need for migrating or backup and restore, have a look at those solutions. Like Kasten is also a great solution that sometimes make more sense than MTC for some use cases.
Yeah, and Noodle Jutsu clarified PX backup is the Portworx solution.
Okay.
Which I know there's other storage vendors. NetApp's Astra comes to mind that also have similar backup recovery type of solutions that you could use as a migration tool if you wanted to. I think the difference is the additional help and metadata and like that overall. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this off the top of my head. It's an experience that's targeted at migration instead of an experience that's targeted at disaster recovery, right? I need to back up here. I need to restore.
That's a great way to describe it. Yeah.
And to get back to Walid's question, and I think MTC is free. It's part of the OpenShift subscription. So if you own OpenShift, yes, you can use MTC free of charge or included in your OpenShift subscription. And upstream, we also have the Crane tool, which it's an upstream tool as well that can help you migrate if you are on other platform than OpenShift.
And Marco, is that Crane with a C or Crane with a K because it's Kubernetes?
C.
Crane with a C.
Crane with a C.
Missed opportunity. We debated that at the beginning. Yes. But let's not talk about naming something, right? Oh my God. I have nightmares of name discussions.
Yeah.
Welcome to Red Hat.
What should be capitalized and what shouldn't be capitalized.
Yeah, it should be a C or a K or like, oh my God. Too many hours.
Let's see. So to clarify, you're saying by using Rsync and Migration Toolkit for containers, you can do live migrations rather than snapshots, as with Kasten and PX backup.
No, so Rsync doesn't enable you to take a live copy of a file system that's inside of a PVC. Live being your application still up and running on the source side, right? The way that we approach that problem is that we use a pattern called stage and cutover. So imagine you've got terabytes of data, right? And you also are sensitive to your downtime. So you probably want to schedule your downtime at some point when your application load is low. Maybe it's late on a Saturday, as as admins are familiar with. That's when they're doing their migrations and they're awake and drinking lots of coffee. Yeah, exactly. So in order to ensure that data consistency, if you've got an application that's up on your source side and it's accepting a lot of traffic, so we're able to do a stage migration. So what that's going to do is an Rsync copy and gather the bulk of your data. So it'll capture, let's hope, 99% of that terabyte of data, and that there's only a small amount of it that's actually changing. So it's sort of like a snapshot. It is not a snapshot, so I don't like to use that word. And then during your downtime, you'll do your final cutover migration. So during that time, we'll actually quiesce your source application. It's deliberately vague in that quiesce can mean different things depending on the application workload. So in our simplest case, it's literally scale the application to 0. Although quiesce can also mean maybe you put your database into a read-only mode. At that point, we're going to take a final Rsync copy, but the beauty of using Rsync is that it'll do the incremental file transfer so that it will only take as much time as it takes in order to get the change that happened between your last Rsync copy and when you've just quiesced your application. And then finally, during the migration, it will, it'll take all that final state, it'll bring over all your application objects, and then your application will come up on the target side. So there's different, there's a lot of different options now in MTC depending on your use case, and some of them will make more sense than others. So that's copy. There's also a move idea, which is effectively unplug the disk in one place and plug it into the target location. So there's a lot of people who use NFS. So if it's some kind of a shared storage solution, you can just simply pick up the definition and plug it in your target side, and you're using the same data.
Is there any vendor integration there, or opportunity for vendor integration? And I'm thinking in particular of things like, I know VMware, NetApp, I think, and I think also ODF and maybe Portworx. Like, you can basically import an existing PV and underneath its management plane. So, like with NetApp, if the storage system is the same on the back end, it's just 2 separate OpenShift clusters. Can I, remove the?
That's actually the third flavor, is kind of what you're describing, if I understand you correctly. So like, I'm envisioning we have a slide at some point that we've shown, but basically you've got this like kind of pyramid of options that are available to you when you're tackling your state problem. One of them is file system level copy. One of them is snapshot copy, which actually integrates with your vendor. So it'll take a native snapshot, and then it can restore from that snapshot on the target side, assuming that they're compatible. And then there's move, which is that unplug and replug into the target side. So in the copy case, you're really cloning the data, which has its advantages and its disadvantages, right? It's going to take the most amount of time, but it's also more safe than actually using the same data in a shared storage scenario. So although if you've got a ton of data, being able to just pick it up and plug it into the target is advantageous as well. So, it again, like we kind of described the vast amount of different permutations that a migration may look like. And a lot of it comes down to kind of understanding the solutions that are available to you, and then making a decision based on what you care about, how you approach it.
But we've seen customers like for example, like staging, going back to this, like on a Friday, like staging hundreds of applications, and then over the weekend doing the cutover, right? And that significantly reduced the amount of downtime, and it scales, right? So this, like, obviously there's still some downtime, but the Rsync helps you with the staging process, helps you reduce that downtime significantly, assuming that you don't have a lot of data that have changed between the staging and the final cutover.
Yeah, the normal snapshot and snapshot.
And you can run stage at the time as you want, and so on. But that's.
So I see Rockhound, which makes me think of the movie Armageddon. Is there a DR session on Twitch planned with some stateful workload? So we did do a couple of sessions around HA and DR. I will say that generally speaking, we don't talk about the stateful side of things from OpenShift proper's perspective, because it's abstracted into CSI or whatever your storage vendor happens to be. The ODF folks, OpenShift Data Foundation folks, will talk about it. We had Annette Cluett on to talk about using Ramen and the Ramen project alongside of ODF to do replication and data protection for disaster recovery. And then after that, it's kind of up to your storage provider, right? If you're using NetApp, I know Trident can do things like coordinate snap mirrors. If you're using Portworx has its own replication mechanism inside of there. Same thing with Pure, right? I know Pure owns both Portworx as well as Pure Storage, right? So ODF is Ceph based. If you're using upstream Ceph or Ceph outside of ODF, I don't know precisely what's there or not. I would assume that would come from Rook. So I I don't know, Jonathan, if you are, or Johnny rather, if you know anything.
Yeah, so like you basically nailed it. Like the object storage really is the Nubus of anything like AWS S3 like would be your Nubus side, and then I think Rook is the controller for the block, but I could be I don't know for sure. It's been a while.
Let's see, Komaraju. Apologies for butchering any names. How to configure and manage a Red Hat Ceph cluster. So I will say that we are not the best set of folks to ask that. There is or there was, maybe Stephanie on the back end can provide us a link. There was a OpenShift data foundation or a Red Hat storage live stream that happened. But if you'd like, you can send me an email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com, and we'll point you in the right direction of some resources. So, we can make sure to take care of that for you. Except when somebody shoves a database into, NFS is it's love or hate, right? Depending on what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah, NFS is one of those things where it's great for low level, like kick the tires type of things. But like if you try to put like an actual workload on it, especially if you're not using an enterprise type storage, it's no bueno.
So Eric, I'm going to change directions on you a little bit. So it's been a minute since I've seen Migration Toolkit actually in action. And I know when we were talking, you said that you had a demo. So I would love to see a demo, and I'm going to ask a lot of dumb questions because that's what I specialize in.
Okay.
But yeah, I like I said, it's been probably a year since I've seen it in action, and it was impressive then. So I can only imagine today.
Sure. So let me get. I think I'm all set up. Let me share my screen.
And while you're doing that, Eric, quickly, so right now we are at MTC 1.7. That's the latest release. And what we added in MTC 1.7 was in cluster storage migration. So before, our specialty was to migrate apps between clusters, but we also got requests that some people wanted to stay on the same cluster but change the underlying storage for some PVs. So assuming you are migrating from one storage vendor to another, or some apps you want to migrate for some reason from one storage vendor to another. So I think Eric can demonstrate both, like migration of apps, but also migration of storage, which is the latest thing that we added in the tool.
Oh, I didn't know that the same cluster PVC migration was only added in 1.7. I thought it was 1.6.
Yeah, that was we could do it before in 1.6 we kind of had it, like it was kind of working, but the user experience wasn't great. So that's why we didn't actually build a lot of marketing around it. And we were like, if somebody would want to do it, we could show them how to do it, but it was a little bit ugly, right? So we just made it a lot better in 1.7 from a user experience point of view, and that's why we just started to more publicly talk about like how to do that and with the brand new experience.
What's that phrase about you could dig a hole with a spoon, but why not use a shovel?
Sometimes you start implementing new things, right? But until it's really like well done, like you just use it when you really, really need it.
Yeah.
Accurate. So I'll show a little bit. 1.6 we actually did introduce like the fun, like kind of the lower level ability to do it, but it required a little bit of glue. So with 1.7 we've got a proper UX experience that's on top of that. So I'll try to quickly go through this, although we are going to be blocked by how long it actually takes to move the bits and say I'm doing this for real. I've got a host cluster. That's my OpenShift 4 cluster. I think there's a 4.11 cluster. And then I've got my OCP3 cluster registered. I've gone through the registration process previously. So these are my two clusters that I'm migrating from OCP3 to OCP 4.11. I've got a replication repository that's registered. What this actually means is I've got some intermediary backup storage that's been configured with Valero. So this is actually using and exercising the OADP APIs, and you'll actually be able to see that it's running the OADP operator. So now I'm all set to craft a plan. So this is how MTC generally works. Not a ton of this is different. Although one thing that we've added since then is now we've got several different types of migrations that you can do. So you've got full migrations, which is the classic stage and migrate, bring a workload over from one cluster to another. You've got state-only migrations. So the intent behind this is, imagine you've got an application that's fully managed by GitOps. So you're able to actually point it at a destination cluster and reprovision on that cluster, but you need a solution for your state. This will help you get your PVCs only and potentially some other Kubernetes resources onto the target namespace so that you can redeploy your GitOps managed application and it'll find its data when it's brought up on the target. So that's really what that's intended for.
Well, you've used the GIT OPS word twice now, so I think if we do it again, Christian will appear because we Beetlejuiced him.
Okay, yeah, I'll be careful. I'll keep the lights on. And then finally, we've got storage class conversion. So that's what Marco was talking about. This helps people do in-place storage migrations. So and it'll handle it soup to nuts so that you're able to do it'll quiesce the application. It'll update your PV references, which is something that we needed to be able to do that 1.6 did not do, that 1.7 does now. And so I'll demonstrate that as well. So I'll just do a quick full migration. I'm going to go from OCP3 to my 4.11 cluster, and I'll pick my S3 repository. So this is that persistent volume discovery. So it just found the hang on, I'm sorry. This is namespace discovery. So these are the available namespaces. The unit of migration in MTC is by namespace. So I can select more than one namespace and it'll grab the things that are inside of that namespace. This is the discovery component. So what this is doing is finding the PVs that are either in use or just lying dormant inside of your namespace. So I'll go ahead.
You mentioned S3 a moment ago. That's where it will store those Kubernetes YAML objects and all that other stuff. We
support several different flavors, but generally you'll see people using either AWS S3 if it's an option, or you can use a self-hosted S3 like. So I heard Nuba works, so does Minio.
The Red Hat product is called MCG. So what you use is MCG that you can install. Again, you can use that as well as long as you have an OpenShift subscription. Even if you don't have an ODF subscription, you're allowed to use MCG as the S3 endpoint for migration purposes. So we allow that even if you don't have an ODF subscription, so that you have an S3 endpoint.
MCG is the Nuba endpoint.
It's the Nuba. Yeah, it's funny. Like people know the Nuba endpoint more than MCG, but the downstream name is MCG. Of Nuba, same thing.
And just to clarify, Rockhound was asking about doing the third option there, the PVC to PVC migration. Is that just out of my own curiosity? Basically, does it create a new PVC and a new storage class and then copy the data over? Is that
exactly? Yeah. Okay. And it uses that file system copy. I see another question too. PVs are cluster scoped. That is correct. So you're correct in that it's actually the PVC, but you can follow the breadcrumbs to the PV. The point is you're getting the data. So here you'll see the PV migration type. This is where we see the volume snapshots, file system copy, or move. So I'm just going to do a file system copy. I can actually map the storage class. So as part of this, I can change my storage class. I see people doing this when they're going from Portworx to ODF, something like that. And then this is another new section of the wizard. So you'll see we have direct image migration and direct PV migration. This refers to that new state implementation that we've got going on behind the scenes that's not using Rsync to do its state transfer.
Hooks. Very, very quickly, Eric, because that's a question I get a lot. Like on the previous page, right, you saw like direct image migration was unavailable, right? The reason for that is because when you set up your two clusters and you install MTC, like you need to open a route on your registry so that we can talk from one cluster can actually push the image to the other one. So if that route is not available, that's why it's unavailable there. So if that's not available, we cannot copy the image directly to your registry, right? So as long as you have that route available and we can see it, then this will become available and then we can stream the image. And same thing for direct PV migration. You need network connectivity for that to be available. If not, we'll copy everything using Rsync to the S3 bucket, and then we'll restore on the other side, but that's much slower. So this is why if you have network connectivity, those two things should be available. If you follow the instruction properly in our doc, you'll have that, and that will test that the network works, and then you will have that as available for both image and PVs. Sorry, Eric, it's just that's such a common question. I had to jump.
No, please. And if you see anything, I'm just trying to go through watching the clock, but please interrupt me if you want to add anything. Hooks are another more advanced feature, but you can they're really powerful. So they effectively will delegate at certain steps of the life cycle of your migration out to a container. So you can do really cool things like post-migration, update your load balancers. It'll run like a playbook out of the box, so I can upload an Ansible playbook here, or really what it's doing is executing an entry point in a container. So it could do really whatever you want it to do, and you'll get a little bit of information about your migration, so you know where you're going to and from and that sort of thing. So I'm not going to mess with hooks right now. The volume I happen to be using is close to capacity in terms of its usage. So this is another cool feature of MTC. We frequently saw people with very full volumes, and in some cases they even had made their volumes larger out of band, so Kubernetes wasn't even aware of it. So what would end up happening is you'd go to do your migration and it would provision a smaller volume than the amount of data that was actually living on the volume. So we'd go to fill it up and we'd end up with these errors. So we've built in some intelligence around that, so that we actually look to see how much the volume you're using, and we'll provision a volume if you have the feature switched on. It's either, I think it's defaulted to on. I need to go back and check for that, but it'll actually provision a volume of the size that we have gone in and looked at the volume to figure out you actually need, depending on a certain threshold of usage.
Awesome. That's an awesome feature, because that's something that I remember as previous employer storage vendor. We got asked that question all the time. Hey, can I, before volume expansion was a thing, which, by the way, Johnny, did you notice in 24 volume expansion goes GA? I had to look at that. I'm like, but it's been there for like 10 releases. It hasn't been GA this whole time. Anyways.
Yeah, that's it. I was looking at that last night too. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great check to have in place, because I can imagine that.
That comes from experience. So after seeing it several times, we realized this is important. So I'm going to skip doing a stage just in the interest of time, but this is where you're going to actually go execute your stage. And you can do stage as many times as you want. So you can have a rolling stage over and over. You don't need to quiesce your application. So I'm just going to run through a cutover migration. We've got a little bit more information about exactly what that's doing here. And then lastly, you've got a checkbox here that'll tell it whether or not to quiesce your application. So if you know that you don't have to quiesce it, you don't have to. You can uncheck this box. As the product has evolved, we've gotten much better about observability and kind of understanding what is exactly going on under the covers. So you'll see kind of a pipeline view here. Right now it's preparing for the cutover. So it goes through, you can think of it as a state machine. So it's moving through several states as it's performing the migration. So that did a quick backup. That's the backup step of the Valero. It's doing volume transfer. So the way that we actually do this is we'll spin up a client and a server of Rsync, and it wraps it in S-tunnel. So that's what it's doing here, is it's waiting for all the dependencies to get launched on either end of the tunnel, and it's doing a direct transfer using Rsync. So right now it looks like it's waiting for the pods to come up. So it sits there and it spins, it waits for that. The last piece I wanted to show off is this debug view. At least that's what we're calling it. This was buried in previous versions of MTC, but it became so useful that we really felt it was important to add. It looks like it's hitting some errors trying to find some debug resources. I mean, that's a great example of like, when you're doing these migrations, it's pretty frequent that things go sideways. And so the observability and the just ergonomics around being able to understand what's going on is absolutely paramount. I joke about MTC being a really good tool as a health check tool, because when you run a migration, if something's wrong with your cluster and you're doing a mass cluster evacuation, you're probably going to find it. And those are most of the problems that we see now with MTC are environmental issues that are really unrelated to MTC, but they manifest as MTC problems because we can't finish doing what we're trying to do, such as volumes being unable to mount in our staging pod or something like that. So we worked really hard over the last year reducing that feedback loop. So as soon as you see an error happen, we want you to be able to get to that root cause as fast as possible. So that was something we were deeply interested in.
Eric, quickly, like somebody's asking, and I think it's a good question on chat about how to deal with failures, right? So the first thing because it's another common question. When you are migrating, actually, like one of the key benefits of the way MTC is migrating is we're not affecting your source side. So if anything goes wrong, you're just starting the source side again and shutting down the destination and killing it, and it's like the application will come back up, right? So it's pretty easy to roll back this way. And you can try as many times. And as Eric said, usually the errors or the issues will happen at the beginning. People install MTC, their first couple of migrations might get rocky for all kind of environmental problems they might have and they don't know about. But after a few, typically things get a lot better. And then after that, you can migrate at scale, and typically you will scale, it will not have any issues anymore. It's at the beginning, you'll find all kinds of little quirks that you didn't know about, or how are you going to deal with this and that. And the easy way is just test it on non-critical apps. And when it fails, kill destination, restart the source site, or you can even migrate without shutting down the source site at the beginning for the first time. You might have issues with data because some data might be locked during the migration process. But for many apps, it will work. And it allows you to test at the beginning and make sure you're confident that now you can migrate at scale before you actually do the real thing.
I'm looking at the video monitor, and I think it's cut off, but there is actually a section under here for rollback as well. So you can do a rollback migration.
My face is removing.
And I saw Rockhound ask about ACM integration. And I would assume the use case there is, I've got, multiple clusters in ACM, and I want to from that interface have it move an application from cluster 1 to cluster 7 or whatever.
So that's the next gen of what we are working on, and even ACM is getting kind of integrated as well. Some pieces of ACM is getting integrated with OpenShift. There's a unified console initiative, without giving too much on what's coming next. But so eventually in your OpenShift console, you'll be able to switch from one console to another, and we want to attach migration in there. So because one of the key limitations of MTC today is that you need cluster admin privileges, like you need to be a cluster admin. The next step for us is to provide a way for developers or app owners to migrate their own application, and that will be done direct. Instead of having another tool like MTC for mass migration, we'll provide you a migration button inside the OpenShift console. So a developer can go there in his namespace, see his application, and then he can migrate it to another cluster or pull an application from a different cluster to the one he's working on right now.
Yeah,
so that's the next step that will get integrated with this multi-cluster initiative and so on.
Yeah. I was going to ask something and now I've forgotten. So
I'm seeing some other questions I can pick up.
Please do.
So what are the default timeouts or other exit conditions? So that's actually a very good point. As we were trying to make this tool like a little bit more ergonomic, it became very clear that the timeouts are absolutely critical, right? So we can't just sit and spin our wheels when something's actually failed. We really take fail fast to heart. If we know something is bad, we really want to fail fast and loudly about that. We understand that firsthand. We've sat on support calls or using it ourselves. And if something's gone sideways and it's just spinning for hours, you have to know about that. So that's something we've worked to include. Specifically, when you talk about default timeouts, most of this is asynchronous, right? So when you're talking about asynchronous work, you have to have timeouts in case something just goes off and dies and never reports back its status. And a lot of Kubernetes development looks that way. So we have a lot of different timeouts. If I pulled up the configuration values, a lot of those have been tweaked as like due to we're taking into experience a lot of things. Like a lot of those values have changed. So some of them have gone up and then come back down. But we do have an Ansible operator that you can go take a look at, and so that's literally it's like enumerated every configuration value that's possible in the operator. And a lot of those values are timeouts. So I can provide a link to that if you're interested in that.
I'm catching up on chat here. Noodle Jitsu, speaking of ACM and ACS, when can we expect improved partner training? So I don't know the answer to that, but I know where to get that answer. If you can send me an email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com, we'll dig up that answer and get some information for you. So that is the portfolio field enablement team.
It looks like we're a little bit over. I was going to do a storage class conversion. We can also field some questions, I think, and then we can also tease some of the next generation stuff we're working on, whatever you guys are interested in doing.
So I think, say 10 more minutes. Does that seem about right?
Sure.
Okay. So for our audience, we'll give it till about a quarter after. So 10 more minutes. If you have any questions, anything that you'd like to see or learn from Marco or Eric, please let us know in chat. But other than that, yeah, I'd love to see the PVC conversion because that's one that's it came up. When was it? Last week or the week before? When did we have the OpenShift virtualization folks on?
Last week. Yep.
Yeah, because people were asking, hey, how do I move my my VM from one storage class to another? So I think that'll be an interesting one, and it has broad applicability. And then Marco, I think you answered, it looks like you answered in chat, but somebody was asking about the same thing we talked about at the very beginning, which is, does it work with non-OpenShift deployments?
Yeah, this is the next gen stuff we're working on. Like, we're still early on, so we have tooling right now that would work, like even do demos of Kubernetes to OpenShift or Kubernetes to Kubernetes migration. It's just that we're looking for early adopters to help us like make this tool solid, because it's one thing to make this work in a lab. It's another thing to make this work in real life, right? And be ready to release that as a GA fully supported product. So if anybody's interested into testing this out or helping us out upstream with that, or like, definitely you can reach out to the Conveyor community or to myself. I can introduce you. We're looking for people to test early bits of a new product that, you know, might be not 100% perfect, but like, I think it's getting there, because it's actually based on everything we learned for the last 2 years. So it's not that far off, but there's still, I'm sure, a lot of little things we didn't think about. So before we can release that.
So I'm on my OpenShift 4 side. I created a new migration plan. Actually, I'm in the midst of that, right? So I've got a simple Nginx application with a PVC that's bound to it, where I'm storing my logs. Notice it's using GP2. So in OpenShift 4, what I'm doing is I'm going to change the target storage class to GP3. And all I did here was, it's actually just kind of a simpler variation of a full migration. So all I did was select the storage class conversion type. So what we're going to do under the covers is actually provision a new PVC. We're going to do our file system copy into that PVC, and then we're actually going to go into the deployment, quiesce things, and then update the application reference. And that was the piece that was missing previously in 1.6 that got added. Pranav has been on our team. Pranav Gaikwad has been working super hard on that, and he's doing a lot of work in the Rsync community. Sorry. Upstream. And so actually a lot of our logic around the state transfer and a lot of the hard problems that we found there, that's getting contributed to a shared library that's being consumed by Rsync called PVC transfer. It's in the Backcube organization in GitHub, in case anybody's interested in the work that's going on there. And that, so once we contributed that, we actually brought it back into MTC. So I'm not sure if we're using that library specifically today, but we have another library. Basically, the intent is we want to contribute all this state transfer work, put it in one place so everybody can benefit from it. And then it's consumed by Rsync and Crane CLI, which is our next gen product, and MTC. So, and it's all battle tested logic that we've done production migrations on. So that's pretty cool.
It's always nice. I've been at Red Hat for 3.5 years. I've been a Red Hat, administrator user for 2 decades. It's always nice to remember that open source is amazing for that very reason, right? Because it's not just us that's doing it. It's the whole community, and we can reuse a lot of that stuff across different projects.
100%. And that's like that's our motivation, right? We want to be good open source citizens and not just contribute for Red Hat's sake, but also just to contribute to the upstream community. Go ahead.
Nice. That was,
Okay.
and I know that scales, right, with the amount of data that you have in the PVC and all that, but
yeah,
it's really nice to me that, like you kind of alluded to it, or maybe hand waved over it a little bit, of the reconfiguring the application part, right?
Yeah, that's not an easy part.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we actually were focused on with 1.7. So there are a lot of different ways that we can actually approach that. And actually, again, in the open source spirit, we are designing this stuff out in the open. So we've got this great repo called conveyor/enhancements. It takes inspiration from Kubernetes and OpenShift enhancements. So we're doing all of our design in the open. It's open for comment. We have the different approaches that were on the table when we implemented this documented there, and why we made the decision to do it in the manner that we've done. So you'll see we made some design decisions, and the reasons are actually documented in that enhancement. So it's been a process that's been really helpful for us, even just to reference in the future when we try to remember, well, what were we even thinking when we made that decision? Oh, we've got all this documented. I think it produces better solutions for sure, because we do our due diligence and it's done in the open.
Yeah, that's really cool. Let's see, Rockhound, can you test it with IBM Cloud Paks? I don't know enough about Cloud Paks to help there, but I know. Actually, I wonder if Cloud Pak for data. I wonder how relevant it would be there. We do have several folks on the OpenShift product management team that interact and talk directly with IBM for the Cloud Pak stuff and all that. So there is quite a bit of communication that happens there. So that'd be interesting. If it's Rsync,
we do
can
test
you?
with IBM Rocks, right? I think.
Yes.
There.
IBM Rocks has some quirks, but yeah, we do. We test with Rocks.
And Rocks. So Rocks is the old name for the OpenShift on IBM Cloud Managed Service, right?
Yeah.
What was it? Red Hat OpenShift Kubernetes Service, I think is the name.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm not.
Yeah, we have to we speak in acronyms. I have to remember half the time. I don't know what that stands for.
Yeah, ROKS. So if it's Rsync with which parameters it's used, So Rockhound is asking, since it's Rsync in the backend, is there something in the operator or CRD or whatever that you can use to modify the Rsync parameters when doing the data?
So checksum verify is like a top level first class feature that's necessary in MTC. So it's supported with both RESTIC, so indirect state transfer, and direct state transfer, which uses Rsync under the covers that does use Rsync's functionality. In addition to that, there are several other configuration parameters that you can set, some of which plaster over like some parts of Rsync and abstract them. Others, and there's also an escape hatch, which is we'll just accept arbitrary Rsync options, and sometimes that's necessary. And we try to do our best to validate what you're putting in there, because we've also seen people put junk into that string, and that can break things too.
/rm-rf.
Yeah, exactly. So we check for that, and we don't allow it.
What's the XKCD? The little Bobby tables.
Yeah.
Data validation.
Yeah.
So we've only got 2 minutes left. So anybody who has any questions, feel free to send those in. But I think that we probably will run out of time today. But that doesn't mean that we won't collect those questions. We'll do our best to respond to them. If not, if you would like an email, send me an email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. You can reach out on social media at Practical Andrew on Twitter, on Red Hat. You can find my name on LinkedIn, all of the places, all of the things, except Facebook. I don't have Facebook. It's something old man yelling at cloud. So yeah, if we don't get to your question today, or if you feel like we haven't answered your question adequately, don't hesitate to reach out. We won't, but again, just a reminder, we won't be back for 2 weeks. So we will be back May 25th. I don't know yet what our topic will be. We've got a couple of things up in the air. I know that we are trying to get the ACM team on to talk about ACM 2.5 when it's released. So lots of exciting stuff coming up. So please don't forget to, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, so that way you'll get alerts when we do go live, and you can tune in and join us. I also always recommend to folks, you can go to red.ht/livestream, and it'll take you to our live streaming landing page. And from there, you can see the whole streaming calendar and everything that we've got going on here. So definitely check that out. With that being said, Marco, Eric, thank you so much for joining today. This has been a really great session. I've learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart as somebody who did multiple data center migrations and all kinds of other stuff. So I love seeing it be easy, right? That's what we want.
That's the
easy.
goal.
Yeah, well, easy and safe, I should say. Just fire and forget is not what you want.
Thanks to you guys. That was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So yeah, to our audience, thank you as always for joining us. Really love the chat. Thank you for all of your questions, all of your comments. Johnny, I always appreciate you being here. Stephanie, thank you for your help in the back end. And I'll hand it over to Johnny for last words.
Yep. Hey, thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it. One thing just to before we leave is the health check idea. That's an excellent idea to use the toolkit for doing that, because it gives you that visual representation of everything that's going on. I didn't even think of that until you said it, Mike. That's a pretty good idea. But for everybody else that's watching on YouTube, if you could just like or subscribe to the channel. That way we can get the feedback and know that everybody's still wanting to see what we're putting out there. So appreciate it. Again, thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Have a good day. May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you.